afternoon or evening or morning, depending on when you're watching this, I suppose. Welcome back to our channel. Thank you for coming back. If it's your first time, I recommend you watch the first video because the videos play off each other over time. I say our channel because there's a couple more speakers who have yet to upload videos, but those are coming soon. If you like it, share it, and subscribe, please. A little more housekeeping. If you send questions to me in the comments, I'll try to answer them. If you have any suggestions, like speak louder or change the light or comb your hair or whatever, I'll take those as well. I don't know how many questions I'll be able to answer. I probably wouldn't be able to answer 700, but I'm sure I could answer more than 10. So, and if there's a topic you would like me to discuss or review or go back and speak in more depth, please send that. I work much better in a dynamic environment where I can interact. So this is fairly new to me. This is in honor of Jeff, one of our speakers, because he called it a fireside chat, although I don't have a fire. I'm going to do it as a chat today. I won't use the dry erase board. So where we left off last time, I think we discussed the possibility that addiction is not a disease, but an evolutionary response to pain. For most of us, we're talking about emotional pain, although physical pain could be the beginning for sure. Some people first ended up on narcotics after having an injury and having a physician prescribe them, Vicodin or Percocet or something like that. So now that we know that, and we know that it is completely natural and normal to attempt to relieve yourself of pain. That is an evolutionary process. It's hundreds of thousands of years old. It's wired in your biology. It's driven by your primordial brain or your lower brain, which only understands pain as one thing, and that is pain leading to death. And often your primordial brain is the one in charge. So the next question that often comes up with this is addiction a choice? I don't think it's straight up a choice, but it's not. It's more like not deciding to do something. Your primordial brain is sort of like a 3-year-old. It wants what it wants, and it wants it now. And if you know anything about bringing up a 3-year-old, you know that if you give in to the fits get stronger and louder and more particular. But also you know that when do you have to watch a 3-year-old? That's right, all the time while they're awake. So if your 3-year-old's alone in the kitchen, 10 minutes and the hamster's in the garbage disposal and the cat's in the microwave and shit's on fire and their legs cut open and they're screaming and there's blood and piss everywhere. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. So if you're letting the primordial brain run the show and drive your behaviors and you're not watching it, doesn't everything end up as a mess? Does that sound familiar? But the question wouldn't be, if you let the 3-year-old drive a car and it ran over 3 old ladies, I wouldn't say, why'd you run over 3 old ladies? Right? No. I'd say, why weren't you watching your 3-year-old? And I think that's a solid metaphor for what addiction is like. If you don't oversee the lower part of your brain, it will drive you to bring itself pleasure and get itself out of pain, and that's all it's concerned about, because from its point of view, death is on the line. So that being said, and sort of maybe a recap of the last video, let's talk about emotional pain and where does it come from. Now, many of you are going to pick a particular episode in your life, a divorce or some infidelity or a death or a loss of a loved one. But I don't think that's it. Although those things hurt, those are normal human experiences. We all have that. Whether you're addicted or not, you know people who've died, you've had somebody betray you, you've been lonely or sad or depressed. All those are normal human experiences. Why are they so much more difficult for some people than others? That's the important question. First of all, if you remember that we talked about coping skills and escape mechanisms, and if all you have is an escape mechanism to manage your emotional pain, then that will consume you over time. So learning coping skills It can be very new for people, especially if they haven't learned any. And some people would use work or exercise, but I would argue that they don't feel any better. They're just doing the same thing that somebody who has substance use disorder. They're avoiding the pain. They're not dealing with it. So, having been doing this for several years and interviewed thousands of people, what I've come to find out is, sorry, laundry's done. What I've come to find out is that most of us have what I used to refer to as a base pain that we started with early on. Over time, though, my understanding of this evolved to more of a concept of self-worth. And so we all have a concept of self-worth. What is my value as a human being? What do I matter in this world? And we look for that outside of us mostly, which is an unfortunate thing. But I think that starts really early, and it's problematic. And I don't, first of all, I'm not insulting your parents. There's no such thing as perfect parents, okay? In fact, if you're a parent, I guarantee you fuck some shit up, okay? I'm a parent, I definitely fuck some shit up. So let's stay away from the judgment portion of it, and let's just try to understand a little bit. So what happens is in the first 10 years of your life, for most human beings, our brain isn't completely developed, and it's very open. It's looking outside for information, for programming. Early programming really is what it is. And, the most influential people in our life are our parents or whoever brought us up, whether it was a foster home or your grandparents or your uncle or an older brother or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just whoever the 2 or 3 adults who are part of your life early on are doing. And unfortunately, the way that we bring up children now has disregarded how we were brought up evolutionarily speaking. So maybe we should talk a little bit about that first. So evolutionarily, we were hunter-gatherers, right? For 95 to 97% of our evolution. The world that you know now, the structures, the social structures, that's only 3% of our evolution. The other 97% happened in a very, very different way. We grew in tribes, basically, or what are called egalitarian societies. Probably the best example I can give for this particular audience would be Native Americans, early Native Americans, not after we adulterated them. But early Native American tribes were what's called egalitarian. And what happens in a tribe like that? Think about it for a minute. As a hunter-gatherer, you basically only had to work about 20 hours a week to maintain the tribe. So that's 2.5 hours a day. And not everybody working at once. Now in that tribe, did you have one person with a whole bunch of food and another person without food? Did you have one person with shelter and another person without shelter? Absolutely not. It was literally equal. If we were hungry, we were all hungry, or nobody was hungry. We had shelter, we all had shelter, or nobody had shelter. But additionally, and more importantly, children were brought up by a group of people. Imagine you're walking through the park with your 3-year-old and he wants to run off. What are you going to do? You're going to grab his hand, right? You don't want him to end up in traffic or somebody grabbing him or whatever. You don't want something bad, so you're protecting him, right? But in our early evolution, during the time that our brain was formed, he would have been, or she, would have been surrounded by people who loved him. He would have let him run off. He would have ran over to Uncle Bill, and Uncle Bill would have taught him how to skip rocks, and when he got tired of him, Aunt Jane would have showed him how to shuck corn, and when she got tired of him, Cousin Jeff would have showed him how to fish or swim. He would have always had somebody who was completely and totally interested in his learning process. Always. What do we have now? Even if you had a normal family structure, whatever that is, you were brought up by 2 parents who worked all day and were stressed out and tired when they came home. And they had to fix a meal and do laundry and get some work done, and you were trying to get their attention, but most of the day you were handed off to somebody else, usually a stranger. And so here you are, you're trying to figure out, what is my value as a human being? What do I matter in this world? And what you get is, basically I'm maybe a burden, or I'm irrelevant, or I'm worthless, or something like that. I could play out some of the scenarios. So if you were brought up in a family with 8 kids, I promise you, two parents didn't have the time or the ability to provide true love and nurturing and guidance for 8 children. Many of those kids will just feel like they don't matter. Okay? So, if your parents were critical of you, why, when you're growing up, your parents are gods. If they said you're a piece of shit, you would embrace that. You would believe it. I'm a piece of shit. If they handed you off to other people all the time, you would feel as though you were a burden. But these things play out later. We project this worth into our life every day. So, say I grew up in the family with a bunch of kids and I kind of got ignored or lost, and I felt like I didn't matter. Why, I would spend a significant amount of my life trying to prove that I mattered. I would be a great boyfriend, the kind who does back rubs and writes poems and buys gifts. I would be a good lover. I'd be a great employee, always show up on time, never show up late, work hard, work through lunch if I have to, put in extra hours if I'm asked to. What am I doing? Cool. I'm trying to prove that I matter, but I'm trying to prove it outside of me. And yet, I'm trying to talk myself out of a core belief. Now, the interesting thing about this is when something happens in life that magnifies that sense of irrelevance, that I don't matter. So, my girlfriend dumps me. Being dumped by a girlfriend or boyfriend, that's a normal human experience. It happens to all of us. But I'm upset. Like, this crushes me to my core. I'm sad for months. My buddies are asking, what are you doing? She wasn't even that big of a deal. She didn't even matter that much. You only dated her for 2 weeks. Why did it hurt me so much? Think of it like this, metaphorically. Let's say I tap you on your shoulder. Just a little tap like this. A gentle tap, nothing. You're going to just look over and go, yeah? What's up? But what if underneath the sleeve of your shirt or your coat, you have an infected, seething, festering wound, and I tap you? You're going to go, ow, Jesus Christ, what the fuck? Now I'm thinking, gee, what's his problem? All I did was tap him on the shoulder. But you're not responding to my tap. You're responding to pain that was already there. So think of times in your life where your emotional response was disproportionate to what happened. Like my breakup scenario where I was upset for 6 months over the loss of a 2-week girlfriend. Or I work at Dunkin' Donuts and the boss tells me I forgot to fill the straw container and I have a massive anxiety attack. That's because I think not filling the straw container says something about me, that it's proof that I'm irrelevant or worthless. And that's how I experience that moment, even though it's a fucking straw container. It's Dunkin' Donuts. Who cares? You do, because you think it means something about you. So you walk around with this wound, trying to protect it. And real life happens. People die. Somebody breaks up with you. You get fired from a job. You get arrested. Your car breaks down. And you think that those external events speak something about your value. And normally what you think is it's proof of what your initial thought was, your initial programming from your parents. Again, not to blame your parents. In fact, that is a complete waste of your time. At some point, you're going to have to get over that. But so now, you're basically walking around with an open wound all the time in a world that, by the way, is not going to be gentle or kind. It's going to be rough and critical and judgmental. And you will hear all those judgments and they will hurt. And you will seek validation all the time. I love it when so-and-so compliments me. Yeah, but how does that feeling that you have after the compliment, how long does that last? A minute? 30 minutes? An hour? Does somebody compliment you and you walk around for months going, yeah, I'm a good person? No. You know why it doesn't last? Because you don't believe it. It gave you temporary relief from a belief that you were valueless or without worth. And that's the problem. That's the main problem. And that's most of us, because we were all brought up in this society. There's very few of us that were brought up by a group of loving people. Now, on the other side of that, in defense of the parents, if you've ever spent more than a couple of hours with a toddler, you probably wanted to stick an ice pick in your head. Because that's just too much. We weren't meant for that. We didn't evolve that way. We didn't evolve to be brought up by one or two people. That's just far too demanding on any adult. And for those of you who are adults who had kids, Imagine if you were in a place where you could play with your kid for half an hour, show him some of the stuff you like, and when you got bored, somebody else who you trusted and cared about him and loved him would take over. Doesn't that seem better? Doesn't that seem more appropriate? Doesn't that seem like how we were meant to be? But that's not how it is. And so now you're stuck with this thing, this base pain, this sense of self-worth that's contorted and created by things that happen outside of you. Now, people find ways to soothe this. Often, especially when you're young, you do it with beauty. Oh, I'm beautiful, I must be valuable. In fact, society tells you that. They'll reinforce that, right? We put beautiful people on the TV and we talk about how beautiful they are. And if you want to compliment somebody about their daughter, what do you normally say? Oh, your daughter's so beautiful. Why is that what gives them value? That's a societal problem, and it's huge. You're being ranked all the time by other people, by society, through judgment. You're judged based on your physical appearance, you're judged based on your intellect, you're judged based on your education, you're judged based on how much money you make, you're judged based on where you live, you're judged based on the color of your skin, the accent that you have, whether or not your teeth are crooked. I mean, it goes on and on. And you'll accept those judgments and you'll start to hate those people and you'll avoid them. In fact, over time, most people generally isolate. Your world gets smaller and smaller because you want to avoid people, because people poke you where you hurt, and you don't want that to happen, so you want to protect it, so you avoid them. And I'll bet many of you have isolated quite a bit. Maybe you have one or two people, and when things are at their worst, that's what you do. You go hide. And that's unfortunate, because I don't think human beings were meant for that. I think we were meant to interact with each other. But it's really hard when we carry so many societal judgments, especially if you're already hurting. If you're already hurting, or you already don't see the value in you, then you accept those judgments. Or you get angry about them, but they still hurt, right? Anger is always based in fear or pain. And so, as a group, we marginalize each other. We judge other people to make ourselves feel better about us, right? And that doesn't last either. That's called marginalization. And it's interesting, but when we go back to the egalitarian societies, there's no depression, there was no jails, no law enforcement, no anxiety, except maybe when they didn't have food. But that was for a real reason, right? There were no mass shootings, there were no school shootings. I suggest that most of our societal problems are the consequence of marginalization of hurt people. When we look down on them and step on them and judge them and they're already hurt, they either get depressed, addicted, or they act out. So we created all this. But you can't fix it. Not in the big picture, and neither can I. But so what can you do for your life to make it better? This is where it comes down. So take a look at how often you look outside of yourself for worth. Do you do it based on how good of a job you did at work? Whether or not your partner says nice things about you? Whether or not people say you're a good parent? How physically attractive you are? What kind of car you got? How much money you have? The depth of your education? Or whether you moved up to a management position? I'll bet that you do. And the problem with all of those things is they're not stable. If you base your personal self-worth on your beauty and you get in a fire, what happens? Your face is burnt, you're not beautiful anymore. That person sinks into a deep depression. They have a hard time facing the world. What if it's based on your ability to provide for your family and you become disabled? What happens to those guys? Those guys in our society have a much higher rate of suicide and significantly higher rate of depression and substance use disorder. Guys who placed their value in their ability to provide and then lost that ability. So if I base it on anything outside me, if I base it on all my money and then I go bankrupt, what happens? So there's the problem. So what I'm inviting you to do is start to take a look at where your personal self-worth comes from, both originally and currently, and recognize it's all outside of you. And what I'm inviting you hopefully to do is see that as a human being, as my brother or my sister, because that's what you are, your value is absolute and eternal. And nobody can take it away from you, and nobody can give it to you. It's always been there. Oh, it's buried and layered under all the shit your parents told you and society told you and your friends told you, but it's there. Now, you can start to find your personal tendencies by paying attention to when your emotional response is out of proportion to what happened, right? So, a breakup or a death, there's some abandonment in your household, you know. If somebody tells you you're not worthwhile, then there's a sense of irrelevance from your household. If somebody told you that you're a burden or you're a pain in the ass or you're difficult, and your emotional response is disproportionate, then you were somehow got the impression that you were burdened during your upbringing. Those moments that you have that feeling, that explosion of emotion that seems way out of proportion, that's a moment to look at you and to see why am I doing this? What previous experience am I projecting into the present that I think defines me as a human being? Because I think if you can unravel all that, you will find what you're looking for. And the pain that you carry and that you protect and that you bury and that you hide from and that you numb, that can be gone. You can actually get rid of it. You don't have to learn to live with it. And you don't have to learn to navigate it. You can actually get rid of it. And I think a lot of what we're going to teach over the weeks is about that. I think what you're going to find is, in a lot of ways, we're going to invite you to abandon everything you think you know. This isn't out of arrogance, but there's a Zen saying or a Zen story where this student went to see a Zen master to learn, and the Zen master said, "Well, I can't teach you." And the student said, "Well, why can't you teach me?" And the Zen master said, "Well, that would be like me trying to pour tea in your cup when it's already full." And the meaning of the story is, if you have a bunch of beliefs that you're unwilling to let go of, then your ability to learn something new about yourself, your existence in the world, is limited, if not completely retarded. So, an open mind. Be willing to question everything. In fact, start doing it. Practice on the little stuff. Practice on the little stuff. That's a good way to start. And I think we can finish there. I think we can end there. And I'm going to invite you to start looking at why you see yourself the way you do. Remember, though, your value isn't based on the mistakes that you made, or your failures, or your victories, or what other people say about you, or what happened in your past, or whether or not you're attractive or have money. None of that defines your value as a human being. But the fun part about this is, now you get to, as soon as you can get rid of all that. Okay? Please, like I said, share, and subscribe. Send me questions or comments. Ask me to elaborate on a topic or something I spoke about, anything. If my lighting's bad or my hair's a mess or anything, send it in. I would love to hear it, and I'm happy to talk about it. And if I get straight up questions, I'll write them on 3x5 cards and I'll pull them out and talk to them next time. Hopefully, before the next video, which I do every 2 weeks, Chris Casagandre or Jeff Ferlat or both will put a video. I don't do any editing, by the way, so you're going to see me walk to the camera because the little remote that I had to turn it on apparently doesn't work anymore. So thank you again. Have a good night.